Good morning, can you hear me? Right, first of all, could I ask a big favour of you? It's going to be much better if those people who are towards the back wouldn't mind coming forward, if you would move forward, please, because it makes for a more cosy atmosphere. I promise I'm not going to pick on people and ask for volunteers to come up here and perform. So it's really just so that we have a more cosy atmosphere. Please, would you mind coming forward? Today, if preferably.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Please. And sometimes I'm going to be asking you to work in pairs or small groups. So rather than sitting by yourself, if you could find yourself one of your colleagues that you could sit next to and get to know, that would also be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good morning. Morning. The first thing is that Alberto asked me to remind you that this is being live streamed. So if we could have a big good morning to all the people, hopefully, who are watching at home, that would be wonderful. So, 1, 2, 3.
Good morning.
Fabulous. Okay. My name's Monica. I'm director of the International Health Schools in Torres Vedras and Lisbon. I'm here just to very briefly introduce Diana. I think a lot of people will know her already. You'll know that she's Director of Studies at our schools and that she has worked all over the world. She's very involved in teacher training and teacher development. Currently she's doing some courses as well as the International House Teacher Training. She's been doing courses as a formadora certificada with our local secondary and C+S schools in Torres Vedras. I think you're going to find her talk stimulating, I hope so, because there's been a lot of work going on in the background and I think I could almost give the talk for her. Okay, so thank you so much for getting up early.
Yeah.
Just make sure that she makes it worthwhile for you, okay? I'm going to leave you to it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I'd just like to wish a warm welcome to those of you who are watching this live stream. Thank you for getting up early as well to watch this. Okay, so do you practice what you preach? We'll be looking, as you know, today at teachers' beliefs, our beliefs. So this is the abstract that you will have read in the program for the session. I'm going to ask you to imagine a situation first of all. I'd like you, and this relates obviously to teachers' beliefs. I'd like you to imagine that one of your colleagues in your school comes to you with the following problem and asks for your advice. And what I'd like you to do is listen to the problem and think what you would say in response to your colleague's problem. So here's the problem. It's this young man here. And we're going to call him Francisco, okay? So your colleague says, oh, I've got a problem with Francisco. The other students in the class don't want to work with him because he's just so electrical, he's so boisterous. He realizes this, he's not stupid, and now he, in turn, is refusing to work with anybody else when we do pair work activities. And in fact, there's only one kid in the class that's prepared to work with him. And that doesn't seem very fair that this kid should always be the one that's working with Francisco. So, of course, you might be asking your colleague some other probing questions to find out more about the circumstances. But I'd like you to discuss your response. What would you say to your colleague with the person or people around you, okay? And what you need to do is, as you're discussing the kind of advice that you would give, can you make a note of the advice, the points of advice that you would give, please? So I'm going to give you about 3 or 4 minutes to put your ideas together in pairs and make notes. We're going to refer to these notes later on in the session. Off you go. Okay. No, we don't need, no, thank you. Okay, thank you. What I'd like you to do, so for the people that arrived late, or just arrived, sorry, they've just arrived, here is Francisco. He's causing a problem to a colleague, an imaginary colleague, and because he's so boisterous, lively in the class, he won't settle down, the result being that nobody will work with him, apart from one kid, and he won't work with anybody else, and it seems unfair to have the one child being forced to work with him. What advice would you give? This is the advice that I gave to my colleague in my school. I said, forget pair work, just forget it for the next couple of lessons, and keep student interaction going through you, i.e. cross-class questions and answers, and more individual work. So you're kind of removing that the catalyst for discontent and issues. Secondly, make sure that when you give instructions that they're very carefully staged, and don't start giving instructions until all your students are quiet as possible and attentive, and check that the students understand what they've got to do. And then I suggested in the third lesson, why don't you set up a new seating plan where everyone is working with someone different? And then set up a pair work activity carefully and clearly to make sure that they know the rules of interaction, i.e. that they need to listen, that they need to share ideas, that they need to sit still and not prod people, because that was one of the problems with Francisco. He kept on prodding other people. So you're setting up clear rules, not only for what to do in the pair work activity and what to say, but also what not to do as well. I also suggested it might be a good idea to praise Francisco, not just to assume that he's always going to be a problem, but notice when he's working well and provide judicious praise. By that I mean not just saying, hey, that's great or fantastic, but giving a clear indication to Francisco of why you're happy with him, what he's done that is causing you to be praising him. Also, involve the teacher, or involve your colleague. I think it's important that they are involved in the decision-making processes, that you can't just say to your colleague, I think you ought to do this, that and the other, and leave it. I think it's a two-way conversation. Okay. I asked the teacher later if she, and I asked the teacher if she thought these steps might work, not just for her to say, oh, I'm sure they would, but she also gave me reasons as to why, in her particular circumstance, she thought they would. And she also suggested some other ideas as well. And I should add that I've since talked to the teacher, and she says to me that the steps here seem to have worked, that Francisco is now much more aware of his behavior and is more engaged in student-centered tasks. He's also now being paired with somebody who, a different person, who is also quite willing to work with him. So what's all this got to do with teacher beliefs? Well, after I had given this the benefit, or otherwise my pearls of wisdom, it made me reflect to what extent do these suggestions reflect my beliefs as a teacher. And this is what I came to the conclusion, that we can't assume, we can't be ostrich-like. By that I mean we just can't stick our head in the sand and assume a problem will conveniently go away. And so as a teacher belief I have is that we need to be proactive and not just reactive. So I need to think about how to solve problems, not just in the classroom. So effecting changes in behavior, in performance, involves clearly planned, proactive as well as reactive decisions. You need to encourage a growth mindset in terms of attitudes and opinions, so that making it clear to students that their behavior isn't necessarily fixed. Thirdly, the new seating plan can be, a new seating plan done well can be a breath of fresh air. It also makes me realize we can't just assume, especially with younger children, that students are naturally going to cooperate with each other. They don't necessarily know how to. We as teachers have to teach and guide them. We have to scaffold them in terms of cooperating meaningfully and constructively. And if an activity or interaction isn't working, then the teacher and students need to benefit from a cooling off period rather than just flogging a dead horse, in order to give the teacher a chance to reevaluate. And my final, another point is that I think children need to know that you have seen attempts at them being good. And Carol Reed, whom I'm sure most of you have heard, she has a very useful expression, which is catch your students being good. So notice, make a conscious effort to notice their attempts to change their behavior. And we need, in order, if something's going to work, we need to actually buy into decisions ourselves. Okay. My next point. So just to now just clarify. So beliefs. What are beliefs? Well, these are what we've looked at. Let me just are very subjective. The beliefs. They're based on perhaps my experience as a teacher in the classroom. So beliefs are often subjective, a strong feeling, a hunch, an idea that something is right. But they can be objective as well. Some beliefs are objectives, like, for example, I believe that the past simple is used to talk about past finished events. That's factual. But what we're going to be looking at here in this session are those more subjective beliefs. Okay. If I just move back. Okay. So my next question for you is now, where do our beliefs come from? Can you, with the person next to you, can you brainstorm a list of where your beliefs come from? Of course, they can come from our experience in the classroom, but can you think of other places, other people, where our beliefs in teaching come from? Put your ideas together for 1 minute, okay? Okay, these are the areas that I had thought of, apart from our experience in our classrooms. They also come from our own previous learning experiences. And often these experiences that we learn as children are the most fixed beliefs that we have and might be the most difficult to change or develop. They also come from our initial training as teachers as well. Our own personality feeds into our beliefs. Of course, our reading as well informs us. So research and educationally based research findings and principles. But last but by no means least, and this is where I find that I'm constantly developing myself, is from my students, is their behaviours, their reactions, and their opinions. These things also help me form and moderate my own beliefs as well. Okay. So, why should we explore our beliefs as teachers? So some beliefs may be conscious and explicit to us, but they may also be unconscious or implicit. But if we aren't aware of what our beliefs are, how can we be expected to change our behaviour? If we're more aware of what we do and what we don't do, and what we are like as teachers, as people in the classroom, and what our attitudes are towards our students and the materials that we use and the content that we teach, we can become better judges of what may be considered appropriate, effective, and enjoyable. A third reason of exploring beliefs is that I've been teaching now for 33, 34 years, and so, as some of you may well have. And of course, some of our beliefs may get kind of fossilized and fixed. Just because I believed something back in 1989 doesn't necessarily mean that it should be relevant now. It might be time for me to be re-examining something. And in fact, that can also be, that something being fixed can be a negative thing, that it can be fossilized, and it can mean that I might get cynical or perhaps disengaged from the teaching process, and resulting in boredom, perhaps me being defensive or resistant to change as a teacher, and worse still, as some of you may experience from time to time, stress and burnout. So exploring our beliefs as teachers may be a way of kick-starting us into and refreshing us as teachers. And the last point I want to make about why we should explore our beliefs as teachers is that the things I've mentioned before, they're all about me, looking me inwardly. But also, I think that exploring our beliefs should be an outward, going in an outward direction. So that means sharing ideas with other teachers, learning from other teachers, and also other students as well. Your students, seeing what they can teach you in terms of what your preconceived ideas and beliefs are. Okay, my next point is how can we explore and develop our beliefs? So there are a couple of ideas here, as you can see. One, you can go from experience, either classroom or your own life, to personalizing, to a personal theory. So the experience of teaching, observations of how our learners learn or fail to learn, and our reflections on things that happen during lessons can help us to make hypotheses. So practice can lead to explanations as to why things happen in the way they do, generalizations about the nature of things, principles that can form the basis of subsequent actions, and formulation of principles that we use when planning and evaluating our teaching. In short, it can help the development of our own personal teaching philosophy. And I'm going to give an example here. One of our teachers at our school who believed, and she'd said this to me on various occasions, oh, you know, my J2 students, I just don't know what to do with them. They don't enjoy participating. It's just really painful, and everything ends up just being on me. And she had the opportunity for another teacher to come in and team teach with her. And she realized from this experience that she was very surprised to see that this other teacher was able to get her students straight onto speaking tasks or any other sort of pair work-based task much more efficiently and with much more engagement than she had. So, but she had put down their lack of engagement to them being just simply quiet or weaker students. The observation of her colleagues showed that this was not true, that they were just the same as any other students. What she needed, therefore, was to refocus her attention onto how she set up instructions, how she engaged her students in the first place. So here's an example of experience leading to a change of teacher beliefs. Williams and Burden describe theorizing from practice, so the other way around. And this can happen, as you can see, in two ways. Actually, in the moment of teaching or observing, so we're teaching and we suddenly think, hey, that's interesting, and you're extrapolating from an instant in the classroom to a theory. So in the moment of teaching or observing, when we think on our feet or make spontaneous decisions about how to act, so that flash of inspiration or understanding or clarity. and in that respect we are reflecting in our actions. And secondly, post-teaching or observation, if we ask ourselves questions about the event or talk to a colleague about what happened and try to figure out why it was an action or event was effective or ineffective, enjoyable or boring, then we are reflecting on our actions. So in this way we can make tacit or implicit or hidden knowledge about ourselves more explicit and overt. So in this way we're being reflective practitioners, and we can formulate personal theories which underpin our unique ways of learning. We also, of course, can make applications from theory into practice as well. From concepts, information, of courses we undertake, books, blogs that we read, articles, etc., seminars, conferences like this that we attend, and apply them into our teaching. And perhaps you will can think of a book that's meant a lot to you and that has changed your beliefs about teaching. I remember in the 1980s there was a book by Michael Lewis called The English Verb, and for me it was just like blue sky. I'd never thought about modal verbs being all about the attitude of the speaker, and that fundamentally changed a belief I had, a factual belief about the language. Similarly, I don't know if you've read Carol Reed's A to Z of teaching children. Her blog is full of fascinating ideas, and for me many of her ideas have changed my beliefs in teaching as well. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is look at some areas involved in our teaching and then some useful tools that we could use to explore our beliefs. One thing is you can use a discussion sheet with sentences to change so that they are true for you. We'll come back to that in a minute. So here are some ideas of what younger learner teaching beliefs involve. Okay. And here are some controversial, these are not my beliefs, these are some controversial statements about each of these areas. So for example, in terms of a belief about language per se, you might think that, some people might think that English is more complex than Portuguese. What I'd like you to do now with the person next to you is to choose 2 or 3 of these. And first of all, I'd like you just to copy, so choose together 2 or 3, and just copy down exactly, word for word, what those 2 or 3 things say. Could you do that now, please? As I said, these aren't my beliefs, and they're quite binary, quite controversial. Can you now, with the person next to you, discuss them and change the sentence so it is now true for you? That means you might be putting in some more adverbs, or you're changing the wording, okay? So now would you like to change the sentences so they are true for you? Okay, thank you. What type of changes did you make? What kind of things did you add in, or words did you substitute? Nothing? Yeah? Can you give me some ideas of some things that you changed? Perhaps you put, for example, English is more complex than Portuguese. You might perhaps have said in certain aspects, maybe. It depends, because in some instances it's the other way around. Perhaps you said you can't teach motivation. Is that true, do you think? So how did you change that? Huh? You can inspire. Okay, so you changed teach to inspire. Okay. Now what I'd like you to do is, bearing in mind the changes that you made, answer these questions with the person next to you. Where did your beliefs come from regarding your now changed sentences? Have your beliefs changed since you started teaching? And what caused those changes in beliefs? I'll give you an example. When I first started training, the idea of students writing was anathema. The whole thing was audiolingual, that you were supposed to create a situation, you drilled students to the ground, and then the last thing they did would be to write down what they said. So writing was very much down the end of the line. And I kept to that belief, thinking I was right, for, I don't know, 15, 20 years. My mother came over to Portugal, and she wanted to be able to be independent and go into a cafe and say, uma meia de leite, se faz favor. And I told her this. I said, it's a meia de leite. She said, no, I need to write it down. I said, no, you can't write it down. Just listen to me. Just listen, Mum, meia de leite. I need to write it down. And she got as stubborn as I did. And then I reflected on the action afterwards and thought, she might have a point here, old lady that she might be, that she might actually, be right in needing to see this in order to help her to remember it and memorize it. And that caused a sea change in my own fixed belief as a teacher. Thank you, Mum, for that. So in terms of an example there of answering the questions about a belief that I had, can you now go back to some of the sentences you've changed and talk to your colleagues about your answer to these questions, please? And again, another 2 or 3 minutes. Hello. Okay, Thank you. Another way of exploring your beliefs is by looking at not just statements about an area in general, but about you. And this is something that I prepared and followed through with my teachers at the beginning of the academic year. We have orientation days just before the classes start. So here I've taken, this is to do with classroom management. So here I've taken the topic, a specific topic of classroom management, and I've kind of teased out ideas related to routines and discipline and behavior. And I made some sentences, and as you can see here, there are 4 different possible answers that the teachers can choose from to relate to their own beliefs. So I'm not here interested in the theoretical, this is what I should be doing, but this is what I feel where I am actually at the moment. So I asked the teachers there were 10 altogether, this is just an extra. I asked the teachers to read these sentences and circle the answer that they felt was most true for them at the time. You might like to do that for yourself now, actually. Just take a minute. I'm not going to check the answers. Then what happened after that was I observed my teachers, and I used exactly the same statements. So I changed it from I to you, and I changed it from I make it to you made it. So it's my observation notes, if you like. And I circled what I noticed in the classroom. And then when I spoke to them, with them, when we had feedback, they brought their original answers to the meeting. I brought my completed feedback sheet, these meeting, and we compared. And therefore, there were times, of course, when it overlapped. There were times when it was different. And that was what caused the discussion after that, in terms of why there might be a discrepancy, i.e. why perhaps the teacher is not being able to walk the walks. They can talk the talk, but not walk the walk. So I think that was quite interesting as a mechanism for engaging in a discussion of beliefs. Of course, it's quite difficult sometimes because there may be things that you, as I said, you've got these espoused or professed beliefs which you may genuinely believe about yourself, but in fact are not borne out in reality. And to move away from teaching just momentarily, this is something that I don't know if some of you remember. The Secretary of Defense in the Iraq War in America was Donald Rumsfeld, and he came out with this classic quote. He was talking about, the weapons of mass destruction, and, George Bush was adamant that they were there, but of course there was never any evidence, really. And this is what Donald Rumsfeld said. There are known knowns, things we know about. These are things that we know we know. There are known unknowns. That is to say, there are things that we know we don't know. Tautology here. But there are also unknown unknowns. These are things that we don't know. Typical politician, isn't it? Okay. But anyway, it just makes me think, because this is also reminiscent of, I don't know if anybody has seen this, a Johari's window. So here we have a window, And this is looking at what we know about ourselves, or talking about ourselves and our beliefs. So in the first window, we've got, it's open. Everything is on, on show. You can see what I'm like as a teacher, you know my beliefs, and I know my beliefs. There are unseen beliefs, what is obvious to another person, but not to me as a teacher, which is where I came in as an observer and able to perhaps point out things to the teachers that they hadn't seen in themselves. There are also things that we know about ourselves, but we don't actually want to show to other people, that it's secret. We might keep it secret because we don't want to reveal ourselves, we don't want to look stupid, or we don't want to lose confidence. And there are these unknown unknowns, things that we don't know about ourselves and that other people also don't know about ourselves. It's quite easy to Google this as well. Johari, why is it Johari? Is because the two people, Jonathan Luft, Jo, and Harry Ingram, so they gave their name Johari, their window. And there's a fifth frame as well. What others believe they know about you might not actually be true. So all of these things come into play in terms of teachers' beliefs and how we might defend, why we might defend our beliefs or be prepared to change them. Okay, so how can we bridge the gap between the talk, what we profess to believe in, and what we actually do? How can we walk the walk? Williams and Burden talk about the discrepancy between the walk. And examples here might be in terms of including, might include managing behavior and dealing with discipline issues. That a teacher might say, as one of the sentences was earlier, I think I'm a fair but firm teacher. But the reality may be, so this is their kind of, and they know what they need to do as teachers to be firm, to create and ensure that there is good discipline in a lesson, but the reality might be something different, that the kids are actually not properly engaged, they are messing around in the class. So if we're going to be more autonomous, we need to work on our professed beliefs to help us to mind the gap, as Scott Thornbury has said in the past. So how, two authors, Katie Head and Pauline Taylor, have suggested a kind of a virtuous circle for managing our exploration of our beliefs. That first of all, we need to be aware of a problem or an issue and own it, as I've said before. We need to formulate the problem in our head, think about why it might be a problem, why it might have happened, think of different solutions and list a criteria for possible solutions, weigh up different solutions, choose a solution, and then make an action plan for ourselves, which we can then implement and monitor, and then move on to another problem. So that's one way of looking at making sort of action-based research of your beliefs. Here's another idea. Here, the kind of beliefs we can explore. Lots of different areas here. I chose classroom management when I was talking to you about the sentences that I use with my teachers. Perhaps you'd like to take another one of these and perhaps develop 3 or 4 sentences in terms of your beliefs about you as a teacher. So you've got 2 things to do. One, choose with the person next to you one of these areas that you're interested in, and 2, write 2 or 3 sentences which seem to express your beliefs about you and these areas. So I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes for that as well. And what might be interesting for you is if you've made some statements about what you believe in, these are your, perhaps your espoused or professed beliefs, go back into the classroom with these sentences and see if in fact what you actually say you do. And if there are discrepancies, think about what the why there might be a discrepancy. I mentioned at the beginning that for me one of the big issues and motivating factors for me in terms of exploring beliefs was involving students, an outward-looking aspect. And I'd like now to imagine that you are students. You are advanced students, and I'm doing some revision with you on some vocabulary that we've been looking at in the last several units. Here. So here are some words that have come from the course book at the top. Can you see the words here? And underneath are some questions that I'm going to ask you to look at and to discuss in pairs. So I want you to imagine that all of these words you've seen, as students, you've seen before in your course book. So I'd like you to think about these questions here and discuss the answers to the questions. I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes. Can you step outside your role as a teacher and a participant here and put yourself into the role as a student, okay, in the classroom? Off you go. Okay. Now, stepping outside your role as a student and moving back as a teacher, how does this relate to exploring beliefs with our students? This was with an advanced group. I've done this similar type of activity with different ages, with younger teenagers and much lower level teenagers as well. And here, I think inherent in this are some ideas about my beliefs. What kind of beliefs do you think are inherent in these questions? You have to speak a loud voice because I can't hear you. Memorization, that it's, you know, how do we memorize vocabulary? Anything else? Well, in terms of the reason why we forget things as well, that we need to revisit and we need to recycle, and that learning isn't just about learning a word, that we need to look at the pronunciation as well. So in using this type of activity, I'm trying to help my students look at different ways of looking at language and my different beliefs about language as well. So now to finish, can we go full circle, going back to Francisco and the problem that he posed at the beginning. Can you look at your notes that you perhaps took in terms of your suggestions for helping that colleague who didn't know what to do with Francisco because he was misbehaving? Can you look at your notes and think about what those notes, those suggestions show about your beliefs, your teacher beliefs, and whether they are theoretical or whether they're very practical? Are they espoused or are they rooted in experience? Are they some beliefs that you've held for a long time, or are they beliefs that have changed over time? Can you look in pairs at your ideas, please? Okay, thank you very much. So, having come full circle, looking at our beliefs, I believe is very important in terms of us continually developing as teachers, and it can either be carefully managed as Head and Taylor were suggesting, in a sort of a virtuous cycle, or it can be done through discussions with your colleagues and looking at what you do in the classroom by perhaps having a few statements that you then look at and assess against what you're doing in the classroom, and you involving your students as well. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.